All right. Welcome back to the Howard Experience Show, MINDHEAD series, featuring the Earth Catastrophe cycle from the Suspicious Observer, Ben Davidson. We're going to jump back into the series. As you know, if you've been following, this is our third set in his series that he's running off his channel. You can find him on YouTube, Facebook. That definitely talks about scientific data as well as myth and legend that is written around the world, and how all these data points meet at one vector, and how things are starting to be generated as far as data, knowledge, in the community, in the world, in all different parts, countries, disciplines. It's coming together, and he is a very smart individual, to say the least. And he's gathered many people across the world to meet these certain conclusions that could definitely be some of the truth to our past. And here at the Howard Experience MINDHEAD series, those are the kind of things that we like to talk about, share to you, so you have a different angle on, different things that may be happening in the world, and make up your own mind, make up your own decisions. And we will be streaming today 6 through 10 series, and we will go to the channel now. Again, you can find him on YouTube right here, the Suspicious Observer. The Earth's Catastrophe cycles are up to cycle 20, and we are going to be doing episodes 6 through 10 today. And let me just find it real quick. As you can also see, there's also different topics from around the world, different weather-related events that are happening. And he basically breaks it down on the data that he gets from all the different sources in different countries. But like I said, today we are going to start with episode 6 and go all the way through episode 10. And let me just find it real quick. Sorry about that. Today's stream will last about maybe about an hour. So we did the micronova already. We did oceans. Wait, hold on for a moment. Here we go. We'll be starting with star metal again, Earth Catastrophe cycle. And again, brief narrative, things you might want to know. Maybe you were curious about, because as you can admit, there's strange weather happening around the world that are in cycles told by our ancestors. One of the good things that he points out that I thought very intriguing was we are descendants of the survivors. And the more you know, the better off you are. Knowledge is power. Remember that. And we are going to start today with Series 6. Thank you for joining me here at the Howard Experience MINDHEAD series. Let's do it, man.
In the historic record in the Egyptian mythology and all the religions, they talk about these events out in the asteroid belt, which led me to believe that this object had a collision with a super Earth protoplanet out there and deposited some of its material, and it could have been a star. So the idea was that the stellar material in a collision could have been released in the solar system as a huge debris field that the moon, the Earth to be, and Mars had to fly through, and this stuff got, swallowed up under the surface on these planets and show up as these magnetic anomalies that Earth, Moon, and Mars have abundant amounts of them and registered by Clementine and Mars, observer satellites and so forth. So it just was the idea that there was a celestial event based by historic record, religious records that might have been an indication of how these magnetic anomalies came to be on these planets.
Now, after I worked for NASA, I went to the University of Chicago, and they have the Oriental Institute, and I was fascinated by it because they have the cylinder seals from Samaria that they do these first lithographs in clay and all this cool stuff. But the Egyptian side had me totally fascinated. Inside the ellipse of this, you'll see a staff, a long rod, with this kind of pointy head on it with some other things, the Jed and the Ankh next to it. And that's called Cham. Now, that's a star metal. So I have this idea that maybe the evolution of the magnetic crustal areas on the Martian surface are really a star metal impact. One of the things I did see that no one has seen yet is the King Khufu. Khufu, as opposed to only 3 of the pharaohs before him, didn't use the solar disk. He used the black disk. Okay? After Khufu, almost all the pharaohs used the solar disk again. During the reign of Khufu, he closed the temples, he closed the solar worship and all that stuff because something appeared in the sky they weren't expecting, a black object, some new thing. Pharaohs named themselves after stars. Is that what Khufu's saying? That was interesting. But the basic thing with Cham is you only see it with the gods, the god Horus, the god Anubis, the god Osiris, and the pharaohs that ascend to heaven as Osiris after death.
You have to bring in new evidence, and it has to adjust your theory, because theories are just theories. One of the things that you and I have been talking about are the idea of these micronova events on the sun, these periodic cyclical eruptions on many stars based on the Kepler-2 satellite data, and that as this stuff is sprayed out into the universe around our solar system, and these things could have been blasted out from the sun in these periodic explosions, and that could have been deposited on the moon, on Earth, on Mars. The fact that they're only about 12 miles down indicates they're not deep penetrator meteor impacts. So it leads me now to believe that these magnetic anomalies, if not all of them, certainly some of them, could be from solar eruptions. And this is just solar material that is splattered out and these planets have run into in this huge cloud of debris once the sun releases these nova events.
There's your planetary star metal impact theory. And now we have Mars with these odd magnetic regions that you can't explain. Now they try to say, well, these are upwellings of core material. Well, okay, where's the gravity and where's the magnetism in the same place? Because you have density, you should have that, and the magnetic areas aren't even near where the heavy volcanoes are. Over here, in the Tharsis region, or Alba-Patera. No magnetic stuff up there. You have these big basins, like Hellas and Argyre, where these impacts that occurred after this happened demagnetize those areas, right? And we've seen this on Earth too. About 90 million years ago, a large boloid hit Yucatan Peninsula, the Chicxulub event. And sure enough, doesn't affect the gravity much, but this might have been one of those objects, because suddenly there's a magnetic anomaly there. So, star metal on Mars. Here's the theory. This thing came in, smacked the planet up, our planet, debris field, and that's the stuff that's underneath the surface on Mars. It's only in some area. It's only like a certain degree of it. It wasn't like it just kept happening over geologic time. It's like it happened and it didn't happen anymore. And these are big, big fields. At 200 kilometers, they're really strong. And they're in the southern hemisphere, and they're not even looking at these places as landing sites. I think they should. One of the best ones, the strongest one on the planet, is over by Copernicus crater in the southern hemisphere. That's where they should look for a landing site to study this phenomenon. Because if you're going to put astronauts up there, you better have some kind of magnetic protection field over where they're living and operating. We also see this on Earth. The SWARM mission has identified large impacts of what appears to be penetrator magnetics on Earth. And there's maps of that. The difference is, though, the ones on Mars are like an order of magnitudes higher than the ones on Earth. The moon was also out there during all this. So are there mining possibilities on the moon? Well, I asked a friend of mine about that. He and I rewrote a proposal for space station back in '93 that got accepted and actually was the first 3 flights. And I said, well, you were up there, because you've been up there. Did you ever see anything really cool, anything really unusual? This was back when I was still over there in like 1992 or 3 when we were playing around. And it suddenly made sense to me now. He said, yeah, Rainier Gamma, near Rainier Crater. It's this really weird looking thing on the surface. Topographically, nothing there. Photographically, this wispy thing that just arcs across the surface. Well, the Clementine mission went up there, and sure enough, they found a big magnetic anomaly in that area, right next to Rainier Crater, right underneath that anomaly. When you do the gravitational maps, you see that it's there. There's a closed loop magnetic material about 10, 12 miles under the surface that has the same characteristics on Mars, where it's looping out and looping back. I don't think that's what it is. Come on, let's be serious. But I certainly think it's worth looking at. And I certainly think that if we go to Mars, we should be going into the southern hemisphere where these magnetic fields are.
Now, one of the interesting things about the Clementine mission is it took magnetic readings of the entire surface of the moon and found the largest magnetic anomalies on the far side of the moon, around Von Karman and Leavitt's craters on the far side, which is exactly where the Chinese just landed a lander.
In the case of Velikovsky, there is something high, and the cost of being himself has been very, very great. That is a condition to which I think the young comfortably can be exposed. And if I had my way, every young undergraduate student in my college, every one, whether he's in the humanities or the hard sciences, would be required to examine the Velikovsky case. The academic establishment was saying to this man, you're not safe.
Sentiments familiar to us all as we watch what is now 45 years old. We've begun to examine the solar micronova possibility and will continue to do so, but where would Velikovsky and Talbot fit in there? Was it the planets that inspired the ancient stories, or the sun? What causes the catastrophe, and what are the effects on Earth? Looking back to Deluc, Cuvier, Buffon, Leibniz, and up through Hapgood and Einstein, their belief was that the revolution of Earth's crust caused a cycle of disaster. Whether it was a shift in tilt or the rotation speed, the results would indeed be terrible. Indeed, any heating or electric event at the low velocity zone could lower the plasticity and allow the ice caps to twist down. Any major electromagnetic shock wave could affect numerous aspects of the planetary system. Our sun's micronova would be well below the power shown by known recurrent nova in the galaxy, some of which go boom again and again, and it should not be considered impossible for our sun on a long time scale. If this was you, by the way, after the flash, you might be hoping for the planet slowing down its rotation just a bit to let this one get past Earth. But what if indeed the sun is merely a conduit for the galaxy or beyond in the cosmic web? While the heliosphere provides plenty of direct protection nearby to the star, like where we are, there's still the induction aspect. When the sun hits Earth with a CME, the magnetosphere blocks the particles, but that can induce dangerous currents in the atmosphere and in the ground. Well, if a galactic burst were to hit our star, the same inductive risk would exist here at Earth and on our sun, and this is where Dr. Paul Laviolette comes in. The galactic superwave is a natural extension of the scalability we know to pervade the universe. The big hurdle is observational capability and predictability. We can monitor the relevant solar aspects better than we can monitor the center of the Earth. We have absolutely no real way of monitoring for the galactic superwave. And by the way, once we saw the flash from the galaxy, meaning the photons had arrived, that would mean the main concern was there, since the particle burst would be eons behind it. I want to consider for a moment something that really should not be ignored. In the accounting of Major White's Pentagon meetings, they confidently said that they noted 12,000-year cycles and at least 5 major shifts of the crust. And I want to take a moment to show what satellite orbits look like, because they actually represent what a circumference line would look like on a rectangular projection if it's not at the equator now. Major White said that the equatorial bulge and reversal of it after the next shift created a mountain chain and boundary creation event at the equator, so you can actually trace the lines of former equators. I've found a couple of them, and I have about 4 other suspects for the ones I've missed. But let's begin with the obvious crack up and down the Atlantic. Many people know that it mysteriously continues up into the polar circle, but it actually keeps going. The range in Russia here is not just parallel, but linear with the Atlantic Ridge termination, and it continues down on that same line after a little bend through the Japanese volcanic range and out the subduction protrusion exactly. Another great example would begin in the mid-Atlantic and then run eastward through Europe and into the Middle East through Iran and transitions into the Himalayas and then disappears until you realize that those lines of undersea mountains and volcanoes into the Pacific are following those previous lines in continuation. There is a crack underwater that runs up the East Pacific and breaks near the Cocos Plate, but the elevated Yucatan is in that line too, and then also on that line we find the Appalachian Mountain Range. There is an interesting turn to the Antarctic Ridge that points up a crack in the ocean, hitting Africa, that continues into the mountain and volcano range there, and then forms the coastline elevated above the sea as we keep going, and then into the intersecting Hindu Kush range that runs up into China and Russia. If Douglas Vogt is correct, then it's only a rotation speed change. The force will all be east-west, crunching and pulling, and the north-south lines you see everywhere would be crimping of that force. It is indeed strange that so many under the ocean run north to south, and a drained ocean map is a good way to start looking. Now, one could easily make the argument that between internal processes of Earth, solar events, and impactors, and especially if you add in a galactic superwave, maybe you don't need planets in chaos, and this might be true, but then again, maybe they're also part of the process. And then, of course, you have to accept Cuvier's charge from 1813 to explain all the evidence. And in fact, the coherence of ancient stories represents evidence. Whether there is enough evidence of the planet's involvement is ultimately a subjective question.
A consistency of reports from around the world of catastrophes that are amazingly similar. But a lot of people thought it's just what people dream up when they have a lot of time or they're dreaming or whatever. It's just stuff that people naturally come up with. Velikovsky thought it was catastrophes that people witnessed and remembered as very different.
The story of the sun and moon.
Velikovsky, man, this guy's fucking badass.
Motion. The ancient did not know that it was the Earth that was disturbed in rotation. They thought the moon and the sun.
Read his book.
This would be not enough. You had to go to all civilization, to Japan, to China, to India, to Persia, to Babylonia, to Assyria, to Asia Minor, to Greece, to Rome, to Judea, to Egypt, to Mexico, to Peru, to Iceland, even to East Indies. And the same story could have been found in all places, but differently told, so that it was no question of just borrowing from one nation by another. So this was the collision, the story of human memory of catastrophes that took place in historical times, but strangely, despite the fact that they were described in so many sources, as if non-existent for the scientific world. My line of thought was this: Venus erupted from Jupiter only several thousand years ago, twice meeting the Earth. And electrical discharges also took place between Venus and other celestial bodies, even its parental body, Jupiter. And Venus was observed by the ancient as a very brilliant, incandescent body, rivaling the sun in its brightness. So it is also described by the Chinese, by the Babylonians, by the Mexicans.
That regardless of whether one believed this to have stemmed from Velikovsky's theory, his prior rights to discovery ought to be recognized. And then we indicated that we did not accept his theory as such, but we did accept his discoveries. See, after we had written the letter, the argument was started again, and people did write to me saying that I perhaps should not have done this because clearly saying that Velikovsky had announced these things did not specify the truth of his arguments. And I indicated that I felt that a person who had made an announcement, who had indicated certain things, ought to be given credit for these things.
Do you feel these are very unusual statements to have come true?
Yes, they are very unusual because nobody suspected that Venus would be as hot as it was found to be. And people had no reason to suppose that radio waves would come from Jupiter and
This
that these
interview
other
is
things
about
would be
50
found to be
years
all the
ago.
carbohydrates that are thought to be on Venus and things of that sort.
It's a little bit difficult to go back and to say, well, the story is not exactly so. We have the phenomena from all places, from the bottom of the sea with ash and with nickel, which is of meteoric origin, and the ash that covers all the bottom of the ocean. And you know, geologists today claim, like Professor Ewing of Columbia University, that it was an encounter with a terrific comet that spread this ash all over the world, and now it's found evenly spread on the bottom of the oceans. And you have now the accepted view, which was not accepted only 10 or 5 years ago, that the terrestrial axis moved, and that paleomagnetism proves that terrestrial axis, that magnetic axis, and possibly like Runcan and other of Manchester, claim that the Earth turned over. We know now from observation of Professor Danjon, director of Paris Observatory, that flares on the sun may influence the speed of rotation of the Earth, and there were sudden changes. Only very recently we read even that Jupiter was subjected to strong changes, and this also confirmed one of the latest of my reports you made. Yeah. We generally don't like to know that we are traveling on a accident-prone planet.
The condition is the extreme professionalization and rigidification of institutions through which thought is supposed to occur. Extreme to the point where it begins to contaminate the fluidity and looseness of freedom to think. Fluidity and looseness of ideas, of having ideas, and the freedom to think.
I know also that my work will find quite an opposition, but I did not know the extent of this opposition and the violence. But time has creative power. The very fact that you came today to take those pictures, and the mail of today and of yesterday, proves that even in science, falsehood cannot live for too long.
With Princeton University, Berkeley, and NASA dedicating considerable resources to plasma universe concepts, let's examine how this plays out in Earth's catastrophe cycle. To account for all the evidence and the ancient stories, one has to truly begin to look at the sun. Plasma dominates the process of such an event, to the physics of the eruption, to the chemical composition of the shell, to the state of the Earth and Sun before, during, and after the event, and including the potential greater connection to the galaxy and beyond. To draw this into the catastrophe cycle, here's living legend Dr. Anthony Peratt from Los Alamos National Lab.
Many astronomers, physicists have hypothesized that at one time there was an immense solar outburst from the sun, maybe 100,000 times what it is right now. Tommy Gold was one of the first to suggest this hypothesis, and it has been followed up by other people. So many physicists, many astronomers believe that in the past, millennia ago, there was an intense solar outburst, and so I'm going to pursue that. The Nobel laureates Chandrasekhar and Enrico Fermi were the first to solve the what was called the stability condition of a Z-pinch. Here's the 9 plasmoids. Actually, I've only drawn 5 or so. Let's look at the so-called eye or owl morphology in that Z-pinch. It looks something like this when you false color it and fill it in, and then compare it to what we call eye mask petroglyphs around the world. This is Easter Island, Newgrange. Where else? This is in California. This is actually a pictograph of the Chumash Indians. The Aboriginal peoples are very, very good, actually, as are we, in preserving what is sacrosanct. As the current continues to increase, it produces these mushroom sort of features.
Through decades of searching the world collaborations with amazing observers like Vandersloot and John McGovern, Peratt has amassed the most extensive data set of petroglyph representation of global solar storms, and the most famous of those is the Stickman, which is not amazing by itself, but those dots on each side, found around the world from the exact same time periods, is indicative of shared experience. And the plasma formation called a Z-pinch seems to fit the description of both the drawings and the physics of a solar disaster. Some of his more interesting works include how the plasma columns might look as they broke out in various instabilities, and how their effect on the otherwise largely undisturbed Nazca region could frankly either be the ancient peoples recreating the heavens, or the electric creations themselves, which were simply walked by the people in remembrance. The most perplexing was the 4-current form, which seems to just want to happen when you hit the juice, and the corresponding 28 band counts on the heads of so many of the drawings. It is indeed Peratt's contention that the sun's normal ebb and flow are tame compared to the rare events. This is where the plasma formation of most importance comes in: the great column, the tongue, the giant god with the headdress, always associated with the sun in some form. Over the last 7 years in this community, I have discovered that a small but meaningful percentage of those who learn of the cosmic plasma believe that either the sun or one of the planets in chaos was responsible for reaching out to hit the Earth with their electrified plasma. Well, consider this. What happens when you turn on the power to a plasma ball? Does the glass create plasma fingers that reach down to the ball? Or does the ball discharge the energy over its capacity, coming from the power you just turned on? Obviously, the electric spheres can and will reach out in a plasma state if overcharged, and that includes the Earth. The only thing capable of this charging is the sun, and we already know that the primary physical and electrical structure of the atmosphere is columnar, up and down, described as tubes, just like the interplanetary magnetic fields. You might recall this graphic from Eugene Bagashev's 2018 conference presentation. The only certainties I'm willing to offer are this structure of the global electric circuit, the existence of the descriptions in story and stone of the great crowned columns, and the fact that the sun is the only way to get this much energy into the Earth. The lone exception could be the galactic superwave, although there is no way to tell whether or not that would be acting through the sun. And so while our previous discussion of its unpredictability holds true, the physics of such an impact on the Sun's heliosphere, on Earth's magnetosphere, and throughout the solar system via induction, just like when a CME hits the Earth, bears considerable mention. These currents would flow through the atmosphere, through the solar system, through the ground, through all the planets, and probably even through the cores. How bad would it be? Well, on Earth, this would probably be inevitable. The loss of the global power infrastructure, including the vehicles and facilities needed to fix it and build the replacement parts, which need rebuilding themselves by facilities that need rebuilt, and so on, all while you can't get gasoline or cash, and shelves are empty in a few days, and public water is down along with all electric wells, not to mention your heating, cooling, phone, and 911 service. Not that they'd have gas or vehicle or phones either. Earth taking in too much energy will mean that the energy must come out of the capacitor, through the mantle, through the metal-rich crust, oceans, and atmosphere. What happens from there? Only our ancestors know how much worse it could be, how much larger the effects would be than on just the infrastructure that we have built. Now this next part is fundamental, but expands into areas so alien they can cause discomfort. There's almost no describing the universality, scalability, importance to process, and the elegance of the structure of the torus. We do see it everywhere. Plasma donuts, magnetic fields, electric double layers, all demonstrative of the formation being the essence of something elemental to our existence in the cosmos. And while Princeton, Berkeley, and NASA can and have attested to this truth, so has Stan Tenen, decades undebunked, and acclaimed by professors from Harvard, Yale, and a very, very long list. I suggest you get that mind of yours open right now. Using the Hebrew letters for Genesis 1:1, wrapped in a coil around a central point, he found the letters lining up, indicating a successful pattern folding of the text geometry. The only 3D way to fold a coil undisturbed is through itself as a torus. He hilariously refers to this as the bagel theory of reality. Now this is interesting. When he saw the color map torus geometric puzzle segment, he must have realized that it had to be simplified for the torus alone and must include that coil in the middle around which he first wrapped the verse of the Torah. This absolutely is the simplest segment that can be used to piece together into a full self-coiling torus with the helical pinch point in the center. And in case you haven't noticed, he's using it to form every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, in which this great puzzle concerning the essence of everything was originally written. This is an amazing understanding of plasma physics for an ancient species, not to mention language and geometry and patterns and much, much more. By the way, that name was Stan Tenen, and his videos can be found in the description box beneath this video. Coming back to the catastrophe cycle, we can be almost certain that either the disk torus known as the galaxy, the disk or full toroidal heliospheric fields, or the magnetic and electric toroidal forms of Earth are heavily involved in the catastrophe process. And in Part 9, we will examine the effects on Earth's crust and magnetic poles, including what it would take to change the rotation speed and what it would take to tilt the planet. Be safe, everyone.
We know now from observation of Professor Danjon, director of Paris Observatory, that flares on the sun may influence the speed of rotation of the Earth, possibly, like Runcorn and others of Manchester claim that the Earth turned over.
It's the event that seems unthinkable, but would explain the bones, the stones, and the stories of antiquity. The Earth's changing rotation, or a crustal displacement, would leave behind stories of the sun and moon disturbed in their daily motion. It's a calm solar system, until it's not. In the case of a micronova, there's a lot that happens between the blast and our swimming through the ice bridges of a nebula. Let's begin with the rotation change. This is a part of the Vogt version of the event, just like the Thomas and Hapgood and Cuvier versions and many others, and would easily account for the terrible wind and eruptions of the sea without even the slightest tilt change, as a rotation change only still keeps the wind and water continuing onward with their momentum. But surely the sun couldn't affect the Earth's rotation, right? The mere concept seems so foreign that surely no NASA scientists or university professors have published on the topic. Surely you couldn't find dozens of papers on that topic going back decades, and Surely, if something like a solar storm could affect Earth's rotation, imagine what a superflare in the X100 range could do, something possible on 800 to 2,000 year timescales. And then, imagine what the micronova could do. Surely, such a connection between the sun and the spin which we take for granted every day is impossible, right?
From observation of Professor Danjon, director of Paris Observatory, that flares on the sun may influence the speed of rotation of the Earth, and there were sudden changes.
That name, Danjon. It's an easy one to find in the reference section of the work suggesting this connection with Earth's rotation, but his actual works are difficult to find, especially in English. They do represent, however, the foundation of modern understanding of space weather connections to the length of a day. Since that time, the notion that geomagnetic jerks and solar storms in general do indeed change the rotation of the planet has come to be well accepted. The first example of solar-induced speed changes was the well-studied 1972 event. Numerous methods detected the shift in the length of day, coincident exactly with the great solar storm of August that year. Recall you were to imagine the effect of a superflare or micronova, given that decadal to centennial solar storms can have a noticeable effect. And now imagine a disruption to Earth's field so great that induction actually affects the core, causing the greatest geomagnetic jerk in known history. As foreign and impossible a concept as this may seem, remember that the crust is literally thin, like the skin of an apple. It is quasi-locked together in hard rock and riding over top a fluid mantle. But if that simple picture was it, the crust would not be locked to the rotation of the mantle. In fact, the situation relevant to unlocking the crust for a change in rotation or in tilt involves a relatively thin shell on top of partially melted and melting rocks, still well locked, and on top of the key piece of the puzzle, the weak plastic rock that separates that thin shell from the thousands of miles below. It is that layer that has amazing electrical properties and is a slight change in temperature or electromagnetic condition away from acting less like friction creating plastic rock and more like a free fluid. And since it is unlikely to be geohomogeneous across the planet, we'll have activation of the faults and volcanoes, massive collisions and crimping of the crustal portions, with others breaking open to the fire beneath. Mechanisms of action for both a grand solar event and a galactic superwave might include cosmic ray-triggered changes to the mantle from the highest energy penetrating particles, as well as induced currents that would fill the solar system electric field and the global electric circuit due to the shockwave impact on the heliosphere and magnetosphere. These direct thermal and electromagnetic changes to the crust might be enough to break the lock even if it wasn't already changing electromagnetically, as Earth's magnetic reversal has been underway for more than 100 years. Fun fact, the current reversal already can't break the record for fastest reversal, which goes to 80 years, among others under 100, as studied by the USGS, Occidental, and Berkeley. The fields are already weakening faster and faster. The magnetic poles are shifting faster and faster. In 2018, the North Pole specifically began racing so quickly that the world magnetic model exceeded the acceptable error nearly 2 years early. With the North moving faster, the South is actually ahead in the race, already left Antarctica. All of the above is made more complex if the tilt of the Earth changes in addition to the rotation speed, which is what we heard about in Worlds in Peril, the accounts of Major White. If you'll recall, in that version, unlike Hapgood's, it was the magnetic pole flip itself tugging the crust back into realignment with the spin axis. Now, if there is an unlocking of the crust from the mantle, we have competing forces in terms of a tilt change. First, the Earth is lopsided and wants to tip over. Mountain ranges rise high above the sea and much higher than the sea floor, with ice caps at the poles rising higher on top of them. The massive weight of the polar ice wants to spin at the equator due to the force enacted by Earth's rotation, but cannot unlock the crust by themselves. This was Einstein's only problem with the crust displacement theory, and he never considered an outside force. The countervailing force to that, after unlocking the crust, is Earth's oblateness. Due to the same forces wanting to make the ice caps spin down to the equator, Earth does have a bulge, and that means that a total crust shift as one is highly unlikely, but rather a heterogeneous one instead, where the liquid mantle ripples and reforms easily and the thin crust bends and breaks and conforms to the fiery bed beneath. Some areas fall into the sea. Others are pushed up into the sky to reform the oblate sphere. Tough to know which is which on the world right now. But we can start with one potential hypothetical scenario, the case where the crust is unlocked due to thermal and electromagnetic processes, and the polar caps can overcome the oblateness in their wanting to pull the Earth over, not just change the rotation speed and send the oceans inland. We have to begin with Greenland there, because Antarctica is well distributed around the geographic South Pole, and the northern ice mass is not. The ice fields of Greenland dwarf all others in the north in terms of mass weight with the mountains beneath. Once the crust is unlocked, Greenland could very well be the deciding factor in the direction of tilt change, if there would be one. What's amazing is that Greenland appears to have done this before, with Greenland passing over a hot mantle column that now feeds the Iceland volcanoes. Well, let's look at how this plays out in what is an approximation of this one hypothetical scenario only. Let's tilt Greenland down to the equator. That makes this the new equator, approximately in this case. Antarctica would be on the other side, still on the equator. Some land sinks, others rise from the sea, and we don't know which is which. But in both Greenland and Antarctica, the great melt begins. A combination of solar energy and the equatorial position could make for a rapid melt and a world in mist and fog amidst the rising seas. What is most interesting about this scenario, and the reason why this hypothetical was chosen to share first, was because of where it would put the North and South poles. Down at the bottom we find eastern South America, or more importantly, the South Atlantic anomaly. And this is quite the coincidence astride the current Bermuda Triangle just to the north. Well, what about the other pole? Dragging back, we'll have to flip this around to properly see the Philippines, Indonesia, Mariana, the region at the white star
That's
on the right
us,
being
man.
the other pole.
Dragon's
And this is
Triangle.
very close to where we forecasted that other pole to be, the white star on the left, which is where both poles are currently set to meet in their rotation. Separating the stars, by the way, is the Dragon's Triangle, the Bermuda Triangle of Asia. For a crude approximation of a hypothetical scenario caused
That's
by
where that
something
storm
supposedly
is,
impossible,
Wu-tip
that is
right
quite
now.
a lot of coincidences.
In the Dragon's
South Atlantic
Triangle.
anomaly, the Dragon's Triangle and pole meeting place, the evidence of Greenland's path over time defeating the countervailing
FYI.
oblateness of Earth. And you look back the line of accepted science on solar storms and Earth rotation changes and what it would take to unlock the crust, and we're just one micronova away. In this episode, we'll be talking about attacks of the wind of all kinds. The plasma component of a micronova is electric wind, so we've actually already begun in previous episodes. But here, let's begin with some wind basics, and the wind we know. The Chan-Thomas version of the catastrophe we heard in episode 1, where the Earth basically stops in its tracks and 1,000-mile-per-hour winds race across the planet, is unreasonable and impossible everywhere outside the equatorial zone, since the higher latitudes are not rotating nearly as quickly. Not only would a gradual change over just hours leave considerable braking potential to that worst-case scenario, that goes double for those higher latitudes. Not to mention that in some areas the wind at surface level is not even going in the direction of rotation, especially around pressure cells, and the movements of those cells complicate the matter of wind even more. When you bring in the upper winds, you could get major instabilities, and even a gradual slowdown there would mean windstorms of a few hundred miles an hour whipping across various zones at once. Something like the polar vortex way above the surface and flying fast around the polar region would actually have the chance to be the most devastating wind element, since its speed would sustain and couple downwards in various unpredictable ways as the Earth's rotation changed. The point here is that the wind would be very bad, but not the 1,000-mile-per-hour bad, and not homogeneous across the globe. Tilts of the crust, by the way, complicate that location forecasting of the wind even more, and that is even before you consider the Hadley cells, Ferrel cells, and polar cells and how they would be affected. The picture presented is one of nearly absolute uncertainty, other than the fact that any change to rotation or tilt would likely leave very few places in the world without seeing at least one windstorm of about 200 miles per hour, maybe more, with others seeing it much, much worse. But apart from the wind that we know, which would have the potential to whip at dangerous speeds, there's the electromagnetic wind. The first component of which in a solar micronova would be the relativistic particles sent out, traveling at almost the speed of light, which would act like a terrible CME and would arrive before the dust and glass spherules and other parts of the shell. These are cosmic rays and they can penetrate the atmosphere, the crust, and even to the core of Earth. They create cloud condensation nuclei, attract vapor and dust, and can literally cloud out and darken the skies in a few minutes if the surge was great enough. By the way, these particles also help juice up the ionosphere and global electric circuit, which further plays a role in the winds at surface level as extra electric intensity makes high pressure higher and low pressure lower. But let's go big here. Let's talk galactic electromagnetic wind, and let's talk a mechanism of causing a solar micronova or great rare superflare type outburst. The thing is, while a galactic superwave would do the trick electrically, we don't even need one. You see, the sun's magnetic fields are carried out by its electromagnetic wind, and it does so rippling through the planetary orbital planes such that the solar wind causes the planets to cross this sector boundary of the sun's electric plasma current sheet, which is not at all unlike the Earth's equatorial ion fountain, except the sun's carries the solar current out past Pluto. But the same general idea of outward current at the equatorial zone exists. But just as Earth's is naturally wavy, so is the sun's, no getting around it. And so while Earth's slightly tilted orbit takes us to 7 degrees north of the solar equator in the fall, 7 degrees south in the spring, making for 2 crossings of the solar equator each year, the current sheet rippling skirt of electric plasma hits us every 2 weeks. Now, let's take this scalability to the galactic scale. Our Plasma Lab director, Billy, favors the notion that the galaxy has this current sheet too. And while the sun and solar system orbit every 250 million years around the galaxy, and while we actually cross the galactic plane every few million years, the galactic current sheet of electromagnetic wind should ripple too, and the sun should cross that extra energy zone much more often. Maybe say every 12,000 years, who knows. The point is that just like Earth, we orbit in one direction, but with the electric wind, in this case coming from the galaxy, the sun's heliosphere is blown away from that center, not away from the direction we're moving. The modeling of galactic magnetic fields is getting exceptional and further implicates that this galactic wind exists and is rippling just like the sun's plasma current sheet. And so while the stars aren't moving up and down like this as they orbit through the galaxy, at least not this quickly, the galactic current sheet absolutely could be. The point is that if we are looking for an electromagnetic trigger for the sun, a galactic shockwave is one way to do it, but if we indeed see galactic scale currents and magnetic fields changing direction and energy level on much shorter timescales, it's hard to envision any physical mechanism by which the sun would not take an incredible surge, just as the Earth does during such crossings, or we could actually get geomagnetic electric storms just like when a CME hits Earth. So why would it be any different when the sun takes that same surge from the galaxy?
All right, folks, there you have it. Episodes 6 through 10, Earth Catastrophe Cycle from the Suspicious Observer, Ben Davidson, man. Whoa. Yeah, right? So as we've been discussing in this MINDHEAD series here on the show, these are all possibilities, hypotheses, legends, myths, data, all come together. And this is the product that's being distributed today in real time. So like we said in the other MINDHEAD series, you know, do with this information what you will. If you really want to get the detailed nitty-gritty on where he's getting his information, you can find his YouTube channel as well as his website. Again, Ben Davidson, Suspicious Observer. Have all the cliff notes, all the data points, all the vectors that if you're that type of person and you really want to, you know, verify these findings yourself, you can do so. Again, the Howard Experience Mind series show really dives into these type of topics, and for the next couple of MINDHEAD shows, we will be streaming the rest of the series, which you can catch. It's up to series 20 right now, and if you want to go ahead and dive in it yourself, do like a Netflix and chill kind of shit, by all means, man, do it. If not, then stay tuned. We're going to try to do this at least once a week. We'll take it from there, folks. I thank you for watching. I thank you for following. And once again, be safe out there. And if you learn anything from these series, YOLO, man. YOLO. Peace out, Mom.